From Eyewitness News, this is Newsmakers.
Another looming deadline for the Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare, may be extended for some using the honor system. Plus, the pitch to raise the country's minimum wage, critics say it could end up costing low-wage jobs nationwide. And speaking for the first time after the stunning raid on House Speaker Gordon Fox's home and State House office, a longtime friend of Fox and our guest this week on Newsmakers, Congressman David Cicilline. Welcome to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White. Ted Nesi is off this week. Congressman, welcome back to the program. It's good to have you.
Great. Thanks. Great to be back.
Let's get first to the big news of the last week, the raid on the home and State House office of Gordon Fox. First, before we get into details, what was your reaction when you learned about it?
I think it's very sad for our state, obviously sad for Gordon's family. I've always known him to be a serious legislator, but this is obviously a very, very sad set of circumstances.
How did you hear about it?
On Twitter.
Okay. Have you spoken to Gordon Fox since the raids?
I have not. I did reach out to him. I ultimately spoke to Marcus and just told him I was thinking about them. He's been my friend for more than 20 years, so I think the whole thing is very sad.
When did you reach out, make contact with Marcus?
A few days ago.
Okay. And did he and Marcus, we should let everyone know, is Gordon's husband. Longtime partner. What did he tell you about the former speaker's state of mind? Did he kind of give you any insight?
No, I mean, I expressed to him that I was thinking of them, and that was really the point of my call. So,
do you have any idea what it might be about? I mean, that's sort of the big question swirling around all of this right
now.
No,
and I think, I don't have any idea. I know that at the appropriate time we'll learn, and but I don't have any idea what it's about.
So we at Eyewitness News reported prior to the raids that the FBI subpoenaed records from the Providence Economic Development Partnership, or PDEP, and for our viewers, it's a city agency that gives loans to businesses that can't get them from traditional banks, and these are taxpayer-backed loans. I'm told what happened at the State House and the PEDP are separate investigations. We learned with the PEDP, investigators are scrutinizing a loan that was handed out in 2009. That was when you were mayor and is in that position chairman of the PEDP. Have you been contacted by any law enforcement agency?
No.
At all since even becoming congressman, I should say. Okay. Have you been briefed on what's going on at the PEDP? Do you have any idea what that might be about?
No idea.
What's your reaction to that? Are you concerned, again, as I pointed out?
Look, I think we don't know what the investigation is about, and I think it would be unfair and unwise to speculate on it. They will go through their normal course of investigating it, and they'll disclose it when they think it's appropriate, and I think it's unwise to speculate or guess.
All right, I want to come back to this in terms of the political changes that happened at the State House, but we have a lot to talk about. Federal policy, I want to start with minimum wage. You're a strong supporter of increasing the minimum wage. The Nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office predicts a minimum wage increase will kill 500,000 jobs by 2016, and they find it would hurt minority workers trying to hold on to their jobs the most. Are you all right with that?
Well, I think, first of all, there's a pretty big difference between the conclusions of most economists who have studied this issue and the recent report of the CBO. I think there's a disagreement. The reality is, my view is that nobody in America, nobody in Rhode Island, should work full-time, work hard, and live in poverty. The minimum wage today has the same purchasing power it had in 1968. And that's just wrong. And what, in fact, raising the minimum wage will do, I believe, is create greater consumer demand and, in fact, create jobs. Because what will happen is those dollars are then spent, and that actually create jobs. I think there are several economists who have studied this and come to that same conclusion. I think there were 600 world-renowned economists who wrote to the president, some Nobel laureates, who argued for increasing the minimum wage and argued that would create jobs. So I think there's a difference of opinion, but the reality is nobody in this country should work full-time and live in poverty. That is the case today with the minimum wage. We have a responsibility to raise it, to create additional demand, but really to help these families who are sometimes working 2 and 3 jobs just to get by.
You know, I'm going to guess there have been times that you supported the data out of the CBO if it was for some policy that you liked. But so what if they're right, though? The problem, everyone wants to get paid more, right, Congressman? But the problem in Rhode Island is really, truly a lack of jobs. And if the CBO says this is a could potentially be a slight job killer. That doesn't concern you at all in the context of Rhode
No, look,
Island?
I think we have to study it carefully, but the reality is if you look at what has happened when the minimum wage has been raised in states, the vast majority of evidence shows that it in fact has not resulted in job loss. And there are just as many, if not more, analysis of that says that this will create jobs because it creates additional consumer demand, but it also speaks to our values. You know, nobody should be working full-time, 40 hours a week, you know, in Rhode Island, in America, and live in poverty. I mean, if you earn the minimum wage today, you earn like $15,000 a year. That's not something people can live on. And so I think we want to be a country where people can earn a living, work hard, and survive. And to have the same kind of purchasing power it had back in the 1968, I think is wrong. And I think, again, the overwhelming body of evidence is that, in fact, it will lead to job growth and greater consumer demand and not job loss.
Would you support a minimum wage hike to $17.86 an hour? And the reason I ask you that...
I know what the number is. That's what it would be if we were actually indexed for inflation.
Well, it would actually be if you wanted to rent a house or rent even an apartment in Rhode Island, that's what you'd have to make in order to do that. So, you know, my question is, what's the end here?
No, I agree with you.
And why $10.10?
Right. I think everyone recognizes that if you did it at the value you just described, that has the impact, that probably having some impact on the economy that may in fact cause people not to hire or to have people become part-time. I think the president's proposal of 10-10 is the right point because I think it raises the minimum wage significantly but doesn't do it in a way that will in fact cause job loss, but will do it in a way that will cause job growth. So I think it's progressive. It will happen over 2 or 3 years, so I think the president's approach is right. But, you know, some of the companies that are paying minimum wage, some of the biggest companies in this country, also have their employees receiving LIHEAP, fuel assistance, medical care assistance because they're eligible because of their low income. So we're subsidizing some of the biggest, most profitable corporations in America with these government programs. That's wrong. If they paid people a higher wage, they would in fact not be eligible for some of these programs. That's just wrong. And so I think, you know, the idea of we want to be a country which people can have a job, work every day, work full time, and not live in poverty. That's a simple idea, but something we should be able to do.
All right, let's talk about the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare. Despite saying March 31st is the hard deadline to sign up for the health care law, that's being extended for people who say they tried to sign up but ran into issues. The way it's being policed is through the honor system. If people say, hey, I tried, then they'll let them sign in. A spokesperson this week said most people are, quote, truthful when seeking government benefits. Do you agree with that?
I don't know the study you're talking about. I think most people are.
No,
sure.
Spokesperson for the, for the health care law.
I think the vast majority of people who access government benefits are eligible and follow the procedures to get those benefits.
There are whole divisions of government that investigate and prosecute social service fraud. So you don't think that this is a little bit loose here that, hey, if you said you tried to sign up.
No, look, we should be certain that anyone who is accessing a government benefit is eligible, and we should have all the controls in place to identify fraud and waste and people who are improperly gaining government benefits, of course. But I think the vast majority of people who access government benefits are eligible, and I think the vast majority of American people do the right thing, and if they're not eligible for something, they don't access them. But the Affordable Care Act is about really how do we ensure that the vast majority of Americans have access to quality, affordable health care? How do we close the donut hole for prescription drugs for seniors? How do we make sure young people can stay on their parents' plans while they're in college or early years of a career? How do we end lifetime caps on insurance policies and end discrimination against people with pre-existing medical disease? Those are all good things that are helping thousands of Rhode Islanders.
Every time we talk about Obamacare, you're really good about hitting up those bullet points, but a lot of people, including Hillary Clinton, say, you know who hasn't been very good about hitting up those bullet points? That's the current administration. That they haven't done a good job about communicating the benefits to Obamacare. Do you agree with that? Have they dropped the ball there?
Well, first of all, I think the dropping the ball was more about the implementation. I think everyone recognizes that the rollout was a disaster. I think
should there have been better oversight from Congress about that?
Well, I think there's no question that the execution of by the administration of the rollout was incredibly problematic. They've made tremendous progress in repairing it, but I don't think we can lose sight of what the underlying benefits are of the plan. But in terms of has the administration done enough to talk about it, I think there's no question that we, just as a Democratic caucus that helped pass that bill, haven't talked about the benefits enough. And I wasn't there when it was passed, but my sense is it was such a battle between Republicans and Democrats. I mean, those were really ugly fights that when it finally passed, some on my side of the aisle said, okay, that's it, we're not talking about it anymore. Because it had sort of, that battle had been so ugly and so personal. I think we made a mistake. We should have talked a lot about what the benefits are, how it's helping American families, how it's helping people maintain their work, how it's helping young people get on their parents' plans, all those things. Because while we were sort of quiet about it, the folks on the other side who were opposed to the Affordable Care Act have spent the last 3 years talking about it in a negative way. So I think you're right. We've been behind the message.
And another thing that hurt that message was the president famously promised, if you like your plan, you can keep it. That turned out to be wrong. People have lost their plan. Did you ever promise that?
No, I didn't promise it, at least that I'm aware of. But certainly that was the expectation based on the White House's rollout. But I think one of the things that we all recognize is this is a complicated piece of legislation that involved a transformation of the way that we deliver health care in this country. And I would have preferred the president said, look, this is a rollout which is going to take several years to be fully completed. There are going to be bumps along the way. This is going to be complicated, but we're going to begin the rollout on this date and sort of set the expectation. I think anybody you know who knows anything about technology says, look, you cannot make a promise that on this one day it's going to be perfect. I mean, that's sort of the execution of it. The other thing we have to be willing to do, I think, is to look at the piece of legislation. Are there things we should do to improve it? Are there changes we should make?
That was my next question. What do you think?
And I think
the Senate Democrats have proposed some changes. Is there stuff you would like to see?
I think there is no way that anyone can say with a straight face that this piece of legislation is perfect.
So what? What do you want to change?
I think, in fact, we have to look at what the impact is for small businesses in terms of the requirement. Have we hit the right level, 50 employees or more? What will be the impact? And I think that's an issue I hear a lot about.
A lot of those small businesses might say, we were crying about that before the law was passed. Why are you looking at it right now?
No, I think we do have to look at it. But I think the reality is, instead of spending the last 3 years attempting to either gut Obamacare or repeal it in its entirety, we should have spent the last 3 years really having a discussion about what do we do to improve it, what do we do to make sure it's really working for all Americans, for working families. And unfortunately, my friends on the other side of the aisle were not engaged in those conversations. They were committed to getting rid of it. And so we wasted 3 years when we could have been really having a discussion with a willing partner on the other side of the aisle to improve it, to strengthen it, to make sure it works right. And I think we should be willing to do that. And if people have ideas of ways that can improve it and make sure that it works better, we should consider those.
You know, we have just about a minute before we have to go to a break here, but briefly on marijuana, the man you replaced, former Congressman Patrick Kennedy, has been outspoken against the legalization of marijuana. Where do you fall on it? Do you think it should be legalized?
You know, it's funny. Congressman Kennedy met with me some months ago to talk to me about this issue.
Or lobby?
No, I don't think. I don't know if he's a lobbyist, but he's my former colleague, so he met with me, and I think he's raised some really, really important issues. I'm very conflicted on this. On the one hand, I'm a huge civil libertarian. I was a civil rights lawyer. The notion of letting adults do what they want, make those decisions, is a very compelling argument. On the other hand, I recognize the incredible danger that marijuana has to young minds and developing minds, and I've been reading recently a lot of literature about the potency of marijuana today as compared to 20 years ago. So I'm still studying this. I think it's a hard issue. I think for sure we have many, many urgent issues in our state, like getting people back to work, like investing in our crumbling infrastructure, like improving our public education system. Lots of urgent priorities that matter a lot to Rhode Island, and that should be the focus of what we're working on.
It is still a big topic, though. I'm curious, have you ever smoked? Have you ever tried it?
Yes.
You have?
When I was much younger.
Does that shape your what you think about it?
No, it doesn't. I mean, I'm looking at it now much more in terms of public policy and what the impact is on developing minds, and there's some good science in that.
All right, when we come back, we have a lot more to talk about. We want to talk about Ukraine, and I want to dive a little bit into politics. Our guest this week is Congressman David Cicilline. Stay with us. You're watching Newsmakers. Welcome back to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White. Our guest this week is Congressman David Cicilline. Congressman, on the first half, I was asking you about Gordon Fox and the stunning raids at his home and State House office, and you said you tried to reach out to him. You got his husband, Marcus, on the phone. What do you make of you not being able to get in touch with Gordon?
I don't make anything.
You weren't offended by that in any way?
Look, I think it's obvious he's going through a very difficult time. I don't take any affront to it.
I want to talk about the political fallout of that. And Nick Mattiello is the new House Speaker. What's your relationship with him like?
Oh, I've known Nick for a long time. I knew him as a lawyer, so I have a good relationship with him, good relationship with Representative DeSimone. I'm lucky I have a good relationship with most of the members of the General Assembly.
DeSimone is the House Majority Leader
yes.
now. So he made a Republican state rep, Doreen Costa, vice chair of the House Judiciary Committee. She said Mattiello is not, quote, a progressive Democrat. You are.
I'm a progressive Democrat. A proud progressive Democrat.
And I believe you're the vice chair of the Progressive Democratic Caucus in Washington, D.C. Are you disappointed at all in would you like to have seen someone who is perceived more progressive, like Mike Marcello in that seat?
No,
are you concerned at all about Nick Mattiello?
No, I mean, look, I think what matters now is that the members of the House work together to confront the urgent issues facing our state. I look forward to working with the new speaker, the majority leader, and being helpful in any way that I can. We do as a delegation. And, there are going to be policy differences that I have with them, but they'll enact what they think is right for Rhode Island. I'll fight for the things that I think matter to Rhode Island and Washington. But I think the one thing that everyone agrees on is the number one priority is what can we do to get Rhode Islanders back to work. We have the highest unemployment rate, or second highest in the country, depending on the month. Thousands of Rhode Islanders.
Do you think all of this is going to hurt the chances for that? I mean, are you worried about Rhode Island's perception in the wake of this? And do your colleagues down in D.C. go, Congressman, what is going on up there?
I don't think there's any question that, we're competing with not only the region, but we're competing with the country in terms of investment, new business, the growth of business here in our own state, and anything that impedes that is not helpful to us. So I think, we always have to be concerned in situations like this. It gives us the responsibility to redouble our efforts and really work together in a really collaborative way with the local, state, and federal governments to do everything we can to get people back to work, to revive our economy. And I think, the interesting thing is on that issue, there's not a lot of partisanship, conservative, liberal, progressive, Democrat, Republican. I think there's a lot of kind of unified thing about what we need to do to get Rhode Island back to work and to get our economy moving again.
Let's talk a little bit more about politics. Boy, this campaign cycle for you is very different than it was 2 years ago. But you do have a challenger. I think just this week, a young Matt Fecto, and I apologize if I'm mispronouncing his name, announced that he's going to be a Democratic challenger to you. Do you know anything about him? Have you talked to him? And are you expecting, what are you hearing about any other potential challenges?
I have not spoken to him. I don't really know that much about him. I know he's announced his intention to run, and we're going to have a wonderfully long time to campaign, I'm sure. And my focus right now has been on the work that I'm doing in Washington and the responsibilities I have to my constituents here. We'll have lots of time to talk about campaigns and candidates and comparisons.
Did the two-year terms make you feel like you're campaigning all the time?
You are. I'll tell you, if it weren't for the fact that you have to raise money for re-election, I actually think the two-year campaign thing is okay. Because what
two-year term.
Two-year term, because what it does is it forces you to kind of think about what have I worked on for the last 2 years, what do I want to work on and fight for the next 2 years. It requires you to share that information with your constituents who are your boss. It gives you an opportunity, obviously, to hear every day from constituents about what they care about. So I think there's a reason that we have these 2-year terms. And as I said, if it weren't for the fact that you had to raise money and all of the things that go with campaign finance, the idea of going to the voters every 2 years and being held accountable and arguing to them why you want to be reelected and why you believe you're doing the right thing for them, I think that's actually a reason for that.
So are you saying senators at 6 years terms aren't being held accountable?
No, they are accountable. They're in a different category.
So what are you hearing? Will Hillary Clinton run in 2016?
I don't think she's decided. I think every time she has asked about it, she's made it clear that she's undecided. I think
you're a supporter.
I'm a supporter. I think if she runs, she will win. I think she's an incredibly talented,
bold
great
statement
leader.
there, Congressman.
No, I do. I think if she runs, she wins. And my guess is, and I don't know this, but my guess is what's weighing on her is that she recognizes that if she runs and wins, which I think she would obviously make history, and that she probably thinks that if she doesn't, when is the next time, in our lifetime, that there will be a woman that gets elected president? I think she understands the enormity of what that would mean for women and girls and the kind of barrier that it would break, and that's important. And I think that weighs on her a lot, if I were to guess. But I know she's going to think carefully about it and do what's right for her and for our country, and I hope that means she runs for president.
How about in this state? Who do you like for the governor of Rhode Island, and do you plan on endorsing anyone before the primary?
I like the Democratic candidates. I'm going to see how the primary unfolds and obviously be an enthusiastic supporter of the Democratic nominee.
So that is a no to endorsing anyone before the primary.
Right.
Okay, let's talk about foreign policy. You're a member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee. Just from that front row seat, what is your view of the tense situation unfolding in Ukraine?
It's a very dangerous situation. I think that the president is proceeding in the right way. Look, this action by Putin is a violation of international law. It's a violation of existing treaty obligations. It's a violation of norms of international behavior. And what I thought was interesting is everyone said from the beginning, military options are, obviously not a consideration. Sort of immediately, everyone sort of acknowledged that, which is quite a change from where we were in this country some years ago. And I think that's the right position. We have huge challenges in our own country to address. But I think what the president is trying to do is fashion a set of responses that will strengthen the country of Ukraine and impose a penalty on Putin and Russia for his behavior. Sanctions against his inner circle, people responsible for this, aid.
Your committee already addressed that, correct?
Yes, we passed a sanctions bill condemning the action of President Putin, a bill supporting the country of Ukraine. Then we passed loan guarantees that will be done through the IMF, International Monetary Fund, to help strengthen the Ukraine. You'll have it here, there's some investments in media so that communications can be made to people in Crimea about what the West is doing. The UN yesterday did at the General Assembly a resolution, I think about 100 votes condemning the action. So I think beginning to isolate Putin and impose sanctions so that his inner circle feels the pain of his aggressive behavior. But this is a complicated issue because, we have just been through the Iraq and Iran wars, Iraq and Afghanistan wars. We've lost thousands of American heroes, spent billions and billions of US dollars. The idea of engaging in another military conflict is unacceptable to everyone, I think. We have huge challenges in our own country.
You don't see a military scenario playing out?
I don't, and I think that's part of the problem. I mean, I think it's the right position, but it's also a position that President Putin knows. And so he used this moment knowing the entire West, particularly the U.S., was weary. And that doesn't mean we should prove him wrong and engage in a military conflict, but it is the circumstances in which we find ourselves. We have to be smart about the way we use our diplomatic and economic power to influence world events in the way the president has outlined.
Let's talk about the NSA in response to their surveillance scandal. The government is making plans to possibly move internet protocols or IP addresses overseas to some yet unnamed body. Former President Clinton is raising some red flags, and he's saying, quote, a lot of these so-called multi-stakeholders are really governments that want to gag people and restrict access to the internet. Where are you on this? Should we, in essence, be shipping our internet overseas?
I think we have to be very cautious about that kind of a proposal. This is a complicated issue because we want to do two things. We want to be sure that the internet remains available and accessible, and we don't place limitations on people's use and access to it. It's one of the great engines of our economy, and I think for the 21st century that will continue to be the case. And on the other hand, we obviously want to be sure that we are protecting the ability of our security agencies and our defense agencies to protect the American people. I think we can do both things, but I think the notion of sending those sites overseas raises lots of concerns about oversight and about our ability to ensure that they submit to the rules and regulations that exist in this country.
And is there a constitutional concern? I mean, we have First Amendment rights here that might play a role here if the IP addresses remain in the United States. There will be a question about whether it applies if they're overseas.
That's exactly right.
Okay. The president announced he's ending the bulk phone collection program. There are still a lot of questions and hearings about the NSA, the digital data that they were scooping up. Where are you in intelligence gathering? And if you support the president on the phones, does he go far enough?
Well, actually, the president created a commission to make a set of recommendations. And interestingly, I met with one of the members of that commission, and it started off very divided. By the time the commission ended, every single one of their recommendations was unanimous. The president has articulated his intention to propose some or most even of those recommendations, but not all of them. I actually think all those recommendations make sense. I think the NSA collection is very, very disturbing. It is so broad and so intrusive. And
that's interesting. We had Senator Whitehouse on, and he was a little more defensive. Now, this was a year ago, but he was a little more defensive of that program from his perspective.
I think we've seen very little evidence that the results of that collection have actually resulted in the disruption of a terrorist action or planned terrorist action. And it's a very, I don't think anyone contemplated when they passed the original legislation that would involve the collection of every single phone call made in the United States, et cetera. So I think it needs to be reformed quickly, and it needs to be reformed in the right way, and that we have to worry about both issues. the security of the safety of the American people from a terrorist attack, but also our personal security, our ability to keep our matters private that is enshrined in the Fourth Amendment and is a part of American culture, this sort of idea that the government has limits on what it can collect. I think that we have to do both things, and we can do both things, but we need to enact many of those reforms quickly. And the bulk data is one. I mean, moving that out of the hands of the government's one way to do it. But I think we also have to make sure that there's a judicial review of requests for information, and that there's a court or the FISA court or a regular court that's reviewing this, as opposed to just members of the intelligence community.
We have 30 seconds left. Do you realistically think that immigration is going to come up for a vote this year?
Yes. I think there's going to be tremendous pressure. There's one person standing in the way, the Speaker of the House. We've started
sort of an important person there, Congressman.
We've started a discharge petition that was going to create additional pressure. I think the demand is going to be like the Violence Against Women Act. They said no to that, and then pressure from all over the country, from women and people who care about women.
You think you can draw a parallel between those two?
No, I think that in terms of the organization, that there's an organized effort to demand action on this all across the country, and it's going to happen.
All right, we're fresh out of time. Congressman David Cicilline, thank you so much for joining us this week.
Thanks for having me.
If you missed it, any of the program, it's online, WPRI.com. We'll see you next week on Newsmakers.